morning, good afternoon, and good. My name is Chantal Marekera, and I'm a youth leader of the Generation Equality Youth Task Force. On behalf of UN Women, I will be the moderator of today's event, and I'm so excited to welcome you all. We are gathered here to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and to kickstart the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, ending on the 10th of December, which is also Human Rights Day, indicating that violence against women is the most pervasive breach of human rights worldwide. The Global 16 Days campaign, launched by the Center for Women's Global Leadership in 1991, has been used by women's rights activists worldwide to call for the elimination of gender-based violence. To amplify this, in 2008, the United Nations Secretary General launched the Unite by 2030 to End Violence Against Women campaign as a multi-year effort calling for global action to increase awareness, galvanize advocacy, and create opportunities for discussion about challenges, solutions, and action. As you can see, I'm wearing the color orange, which is used throughout the Unite campaign to symbolize a brighter future free from violence against women and girls. Today, we'll have the honor of hearing from the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and from a number of high-level officials and activists from around the world, leaders and commitment makers of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, including youth leaders and women's rights organizations, the new Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences, UN Women Goodwill Ambassador, and many other outstanding individuals whose work is making a real and tangible impact in our global efforts to prevent and eliminate violence against women and girls. Violence against women and girls can and must be prevented, and the 16 days of activism are an opportunity to build on the momentum generated by the Generation Equality Forum this year to call for further action. Everyone has a role to play to end violence against women and girls, and we all must act now. To open this event, it is an honor to have with us here today the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres.
Violence against women and girls continues to be the most pervasive and pressing human rights issue in the world today. It is both an abhorrent crime and a public health emergency with far-reaching consequences for millions of women and girls in every corner of the globe. The latest figures from UN Women confirm that during the COVID-19 pandemic, levels of violence against women and girls have increased. Across 13 countries, almost half of all women reported that they or a woman they know began to experience gender-based violence during the pandemic. Almost a quarter of women reported that household conflicts had become more frequent. A similar proportion said they felt less safe at home. Violence in any part of society affects us all, from the scars on the next generation to the weakening of the social fabric. We can draw a straight line between violence against women, civil oppression, and violent conflict. From rape and sexual slavery used as tools of war to the thread of misogyny that runs through violent extremism. But violence against women is not inevitable. The right policies and programs bring results. That means comprehensive, long-term strategies that tackle the root causes of violence, protect the rights of women and girls, and promote strong and autonomous women's rights movements. This is the model that the United Nations has built through its partnership with the European Union, the Spotlight Initiative. Last year, in partner countries, we saw a 22% increase in prosecution of perpetrators. 84 laws and policies were passed or strengthened, and more than 650,000 women and girls were able to access gender-based violence services despite restrictions related to the pandemic. Change is possible. Now is the time to redouble our efforts so that together we can eliminate violence against women and girls by 2030.
Thank you so much for those powerful opening words, Mr. Secretary General. And I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say thank you so much for your ongoing commitment and leadership on this issue. Moving on, we know that change is not only possible, it is already happening, but we need to accelerate our efforts if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Now, I have the honor of introducing Sima Bahous, Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women, which is the agency that champions gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, working tirelessly to ensure that the vision of the Sustainable Development Goals is a reality for every woman and girl around the world.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to join UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and all of you for this historic commemoration of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women. This comes at a time when conflicts, global crises, and the COVID-19 pandemic continue to exacerbate vulnerabilities for women and girls in both public and private spaces. In some crisis settings, more than 70% of women have experienced gender-based violence. Yet, we have reasons for hope. We see it in the leadership of strong and autonomous women's rights movements holding governments and other actors to account. We see it in the success of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence launched at this year's Generation Equality Forum, which is using comprehensive strategies and multi-stakeholder partnerships to accelerate global efforts to eradicate violence against women and girls. Ladies and gentlemen, today we also mark 30 years of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. UN Women is proud once again to join you in oranging the world and shining a light on the need for urgent action to end violence against women and girls. Over the last decade, we have supported member states in carrying out legal and policy reforms and coordinating survivor-centered essential services. We have supported them in delivering groundbreaking prevention initiatives and strengthening data collection, analysis, and use. The UN Trust Fund, which UN Women manages on behalf of the UN system, reached 1.6 million women and girls between 2016 and 2020. UN Women has also pioneered the global Safe Cities and Safe Public Spaces for Women and Girls initiative, which works to prevent sexual harassment and other forms of sexual violence in public spaces across 53 cities in 32 countries. Our experience has shown us that violence against women and girls is preventable. The success stories we hear from you today will showcase some of the transformative work being done to reduce violence, change social norms, and empower women and girls across the world. I look forward to hearing these promising practices. I thank you.
Thank you, Sima, for sharing with us the challenges, but also the opportunities that lie ahead of us with the global vision and strategy of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. And thank you for reminding us of the importance of strong and autonomous women's rights movements. Throughout this event, we'll hear from a number of civil society organizations doing incredible work around gender-based violence. But first, we are delighted to have with us here today, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today we spotlight the prevalence of violence against women and girls, an unacceptable violation of human rights that continues to haunt our societies. Globally, 1 in 3 women and girls are subjected to violence. This number has only risen during the global pandemic as women and girls face the closure of schools, offices, and borders. This issue is not only devastating for survivors of violence and their families, but also entails significant social and economic costs. In some countries, violence against women is estimated to cost up to 3.7% of their GDP, more than double what most governments spend on education. One characteristic of gender-based violence is that it knows no social or economic boundaries. This issue needs to be addressed in both developing and developed countries. Let me be very clear. Violence against women and girls has no place in our societies. It is a direct violation of everything that the United Nations stands for. Upon assuming this role, I promised a presidency of hope, one that delivers for the people, planet, and prosperity. This includes support for gender equality, placing hope for women and girls front and center is a commitment to deliver action. I remain committed to this cause and will use every tool available to me throughout this presidency to manifest support for women and girls and to call resolutely for eliminating violence. For the victims, the survivors, and families, let us put up an end to this atrocity. Decreasing violence against women and girls requires a community-based, multi-pronged approach and sustained engagement with multiple stakeholders. The most effective initiatives address underlying risk factors for violence, including social norms on gender roles and the acceptability of violence. I call upon the international community to accelerate resources and funding to all programs and initiatives on ending violence against women and girls. Let us deliver action for a prosperous and safer future for women and girls everywhere. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shahid, for prioritizing gender equality and ending violence against women and girls under your presidency. We truly appreciate your leadership. Now, please join me and welcome two young feminist leaders. I always get really excited about the youth because not only does it give me hope for the future, but I also know that the future and the present are in good hands. Now, please help me to welcome Yes Trust Zimbabwe and Las Niñas Lideran from Guatemala.
Nosotras como niñas, adolescentes, mujeres jóvenes, indígenas, lideresas y activistas de nuestro país, hemos tenido la oportunidad de interactuar cercanamente con las sobrevivientes de violencia. Y lamentablemente nos hemos dado cuenta que en algún punto de nuestras vidas hemos sido víctimas de violencia de género, lo que nos ha marcado, cohibido y aterrorizado. Nosotros somos esa línea exitosa de comunicación entre ustedes, gobiernos, empresarios, organizaciones filantrópicas, niñas, adolescentes y mujeres jóvenes que han sido sobrevivientes de la violencia de género. Asimismo, somos importantes para esas acciones que ayuden a erradicar la violencia de género, porque conocemos el contexto sociocultural, político y económico de nuestro país. Y estamos cansadas de vivir en el silencio y en el abandono de nuestros gobiernos y organizaciones estatales que únicamente velan por sus propios intereses y no por nuestro desarrollo integral. Hoy queremos pedirles que inviertan en proyectos psicosociales, integrales e inclusivos, libres de discriminación y racismo, para evitar la revictimización de las niñas, adolescentes y mujeres jóvenes que han sido víctimas de violencia de género. Asimismo, pedimos que apoyen nuestros proyectos, acciones y programas lideradas por niñas, jóvenes, adolescentes, que trabajamos para que el día de mañana no vivamos con violencia de género. Muchas gracias.
This support can be rendered to us by availing funds and resources, as well as strong accountability systems, especially to community-based organizations. That support can also be rendered to us through capacity building, organizational development, and skills development initiatives through trainings and assessments to assist actors in effectively implementing their plans. Ensure proper access and use of information and communication technology to enable organizations to reach the worst marginalized communities, taking lessons from the recent pandemic of COVID-19, whereby most communities were under lockdown and the only way that people could access GBV services was through information and communication technologies.
Thank you for reminding us that youth leaders are already at the forefront of the fight to end gender-based violence. Earlier this year, at the Generation Equality Forum, leaders and commitment makers of the Action Coalition made bold, game-changing commitments to address gender-based violence against women and girls in all their diversity. Let us hear from these global leaders who represent multiple stakeholders, including member states, philanthropy, private sector, youth, civil society, and international organizations.
This pandemic has deepened existing inequalities. From being left behind in the COVID-19 vaccination process, to facing an increased risk of dropping out of school and being pushed into early marriage, women and girls are among the worst impacted and the most vulnerable groups. And yet, we are hopeful. We are hopeful because we know that if we all come together and choose to do something about this, we can fight back. It begins with you. It gains momentum with that one additional person you inspire and builds into a movement of change with all of us coming together. So, what do you say? Will you be a link in this chain of action?
Gender equality will not be achieved if we don't include everyone in our efforts. Too often, people who break gender norms are targeted with physical, psychological, or sexual violence, including at the hands of people they know or even their own families. It should be self-evident that people should not have to change who they are or who they love to live free from violence. Gender-based violence is a global emergency, and we must ensure that we include everyone in our efforts to stop it.
Iceland is proud to co-lead the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. We are committed to contributing with ambitious actions to achieve real progress both at home and abroad. As a global community, we now have the opportunity to bring the messages and viewpoints of survivors of gender-based violence to the center of our international cooperation. This is a hugely important initiative, making it possible for all of us to join forces with multiple stakeholders towards innovative actions to make a lasting change.
We decided in 2021 that Accor should officially commit to combating all forms of violence against women. And that's because, particularly during the COVID crisis, we've realized that it is a serious issue. We operate over 5,000 hotels in over 110 countries. So we're as close on the ground to people as it is possible for a multinational. We've noticed during the crisis that, in particular, domestic violence against women has risen. We at Accor want to fight and will fight all forms of violence against women, and that is domestic violence at home, and obviously also sexual harassment on the workplace, and all forms of sexism at work, in particular in our hotels.
The European Commission is fully committed to fight gender-based violence. Our upcoming EU law on combating violence against women and domestic violence is an important step to achieving this. We need to ensure all women are protected and supported and that perpetrators are prosecuted. It's time to recognize violence against women for what it is and change the culture. Only when all women and girls can be free from violence will we achieve a world of equality.
Online gender-based violence can be as harmful as offline gender-based violence. Finland advocates for education, technical tools and regulation to prevent and eliminate online gender-based violence everywhere. In Finland, we want to make hate speech based on gender an aggravating factor in the criminal code. This is a priority for Finland as one of the leaders of the Action Coalition for Technology and Innovation for Gender Equality.
It is so inspiring to hear about all this groundbreaking work and the commitments made by the Action Coalition leaders and commitment makers. Let's zoom into the work of one particular Action Coalition leader, the European Union, which has made unprecedented investments on violence against women with considerable impact. It gives me great pleasure to bring to you His Excellency, Mr. Bjorn Olof Skjuk, head of the delegation of the European Union to the UN.
I want to thank UN Women for organizing this event today and for the invitation to me to say a few words. Gender-based violence is one of the most pervasive human rights violations. The numbers are appalling everywhere, including in Europe. Data emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic has shown how violence against women and girls, in particular domestic violence, has intensified. This is a growing crisis and it is a global crisis. We fully support the recommendation by the Secretary General in his common agenda to launch an emergency response plan to accelerate the elimination of gender-based violence. We are mobilizing all efforts to do just that, both internally and externally. The EU's Gender Equality Strategy 2020-2025 sets out an ambitious agenda to achieve a gender-equal Europe. Addressing gender-based violence, including harassment, is one of its key actions. While the ratification of the Istanbul Convention remains a priority, the European Commission is currently working on a legislative proposal to prevent, combat, and criminalize all forms of gender-based violence. On the external front, the latest EU Gender Action Plan, adopted exactly a year ago, makes the promotion of gender equality a priority of all external policies and actions. From now on, 85% of all new external actions will need to have a specific gender component. Ensuring freedom from all forms of gender-based violence is the first priority of the Action Plan. The EU also proudly co-chaired the Action Coalition of the Generation Equality Forum on Gender-Based Violence, and we are committed to implement its outcomes. At the very beginning of the pandemic, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued an appeal for peace at home, urging member states to take concrete measures to eliminate gender-based violence. 146 member states responded to this appeal by committing to make prevention and redress of gender-based violence a key part of their COVID-19 response. Precisely with a view to turning these commitments into action, the European Union, together with partners, launched a year ago the UN Group of Friends for the Elimination of Violence against Women and Girls. The group now includes 93 countries, making it one of the largest and more representative group of friends at the UN. As we work together to build back better and more equal, we have the capacity and the political will to galvanize efforts to put an end to violence against women and girls in all their diversity. But clearly, we all really need to step up at home and working with others. So we invite all member states and civil society actors who share this common objective to join the group.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your commitment to the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence and for your appeal to more member states to join the Group of Friends for the Elimination of Violence against Women and Girls. We look forward to hearing more from the EU in the second half of our event, when we'll learn more about the results of the UN-EU Spotlight Initiative and the commitments made to the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. Now we'll hear from two organizations doing tremendous work in extremely challenging contexts. We know that humanitarian crises, violent conflicts, and complex social and political climates disproportionately affect women and girls. In many cases, violence against women and girls becomes a crisis within the crisis. Without any further delay, I hand over to our next two speakers, Women for Afghan Violence.
من یک دختر افغان هستم و با مؤسسه زنان برای زنان افغان کار میکنم. مؤسسه زنان برای زنان افغان از جمله بزرگترین مؤسساتی است که به خاطر دفاع از حقوق زنان در افغانستان کار میکند. این نهاد یکی از تطبیق کنندگان کلیدی و مهم پروژه هایی می باشد که توسط نهادهای یو تراسپند و یو وومن تمویل می کردد. همچنان از حمایت مالی نهاد یو تراسپند تشکر می کنم. ما یک تیم 26 نفره‌ای هستیم که در 3 ولایت افغانستان مصروف تطبیق فعالیت‌های پروژه بودیم و نهایت کوشش می‌کنیم تا قضایای خشونت مبتنی بر جنسیت را از بین بیجا شدگان داخلی و عودت کنندگان در این ولایت در 3 ولایت بلخ، فاریاب و کندوز شناسایی کنیم و آنها را از طریق فعالیت‌های پروژه مورد حمایت و پاسخدهی قرار دهیم. ما بی نهایت کوشش کرده ایم تا از طریق تیم سیار فعالیت‌های پروژه را که عبارتند از فراهمسازی خدمات صحی، دسترسی به تعلیمات و تحصیلات، تدویر برنامه‌های آموزشی کوتاه مدت حرفه‌ای، جلسات حقوقی و رواندرمانی میباشد و مستفیدین پروژه فراهم سازیم. مگر از ماه آگوست 2021 تا به حال نظر به تغییراتی که در نظام افغانستان آمده است، اکثر همکاران قشر اوناس مؤسسه بالخصوص تیم سیار پروژه نتوانستند فراهمسازی خدمات پروژه را به مستفیدین ادامه دهند و یا به دفاترشان حاضر کردند. حکومت جدید در افغانستان به زنان اجازه کار نمی‌دهد. بعد از چندین بار درخواست، آنها فقط بعضی از کارمندان قشر ذکور پروژه ها را اجازه دادند تا به دفاتر خیش حاضر گردند. برایم جای تأسف است که همکاران قشر اوناس ما که قبلا در ساحات به زنان افغان به خاطر شغل زدایی کار می‌کردند، حالا در خانه هستند و منتظرند که حکومت افغانستان حقوق زنان را شناسایی کند و آن را دوباره اجازه دهند تا به وظایفشان حاضر شده بتوانند. طوری که می‌دانید، اعلامیه جهانی حقوق بشر و رسمیت شناختن کرامت ذاتی، حقوق مساوی و مسلم همه اعضای خانواده بشری آغاز می‌شود. با وجود آن، امروزه در افغانستان این نوع حقوق مسلم زنان رعایت نگردیده و مورد احترام قرار نمی‌گیرد. مؤسسه زنان برای زنان افغان من حیث بزرگترین حامی حقوق زنان در افغانستان تنها چیزی که تقاضا دارد این است که حقوق سیاسی که همه انسان‌ها از آن برخوردارند باید به زنان افغان عطا شود. حقوقی که خواهرانم تحصیل کرده بتوانند، حقوقی که من کار کرده بتوانم، حقوقی که مادرم آزادی داشته باشد، حقوقی که دخترانم بدون هیچ گونه تبعیض جنسیتی از حقوقشان در قانون برخوردار باشند. حقوقی که زندگی، آزادی است و امنیت تمام زنهای افغان به طور درست مد نظر گرفته شود.
Le séisme du 14 août, couplé aux crises sociopolitiques, sanitaires et sécuritaires préexistantes, a entraîné chez les femmes du Grand Sud une perte immense de revenus et des actifs économiques. Selon le dernier analyse rapide, genre conduit par ONU Femmes et CARE, 43% des leaders communautaires ont confirmé que la violence sexiste a augmenté depuis le séisme. Ces situations renforcent les inégalités de pouvoir et fragilisent le respect des droits des femmes et des filles. Ces femmes se battent déjà pour se relever de cette situation à l'instar de Mofetga. Le Mofetga dynamise une table de concertation regroupant 32 organisations de la société civile. Grâce au financement du projet WPHF Spotlight et au partenariat avec ONU Femmes, le bureau de Mofetga est plus fonctionnel et nous assurons la prise en charge juridico-médical des femmes et des filles victimes et de sensibilisation dans les médias. Nous remontons et plaidons pour les priorités des femmes dans la grandance au niveau de la coordination humanitaire que nous soutenons de manière modeste sur le plan logistique. Pour protéger les droits des femmes et des filles haïtiennes suite au tremblement de terre, Bofedga recommande à la communauté internationale de financer les organisations de femmes pour leur permettre d'accompagner le relèvement économique et social des femmes et d'apporter un soutien multidimensionnel aux femmes survivantes de violences basées sur le genre, de promouvoir le développement des capacités et des moyens pour les organisations de femmes pour une participation active et le leadership des organisations de femmes dans l'action et la coordination humanitaire, de soutenir les organisations de femmes dans leur rôle d'agents de la résilience aux catastrophes, au changement climatique et de promotion pour la paix. Il est temps d'agir pour l'égalité. Merci.
Thank you so much. We stand in solidarity with our sisters in Afghanistan and Haiti and hope that your appeal to the international community is heard loud and clear. It now gives me immense pleasure to introduce the new special rapporteur on violence against women, its causes and consequences, Reem Asalam, who started her tenure in August 2021. We are very excited to have her here today to tell us about the priorities of her mandate and how the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence Blueprint can catalyze and accelerate progress over the next 5 years.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to join this commemoration of the International Day of Ending Violence Against Women. I must say that on a day like this, I find it very unfortunate that 27 years after my mandate was created by the then UN Commission for Human Rights, that the mandate is still here today and that it is still needed more than ever before. Ideally, I would have loved that the fight to end violence against women and girls would have been sufficiently prioritized for there not to be a need for a special rapporteur for this. In fact, I wish we could say that everyone is treating this objective as an emergency, because in so many ways it is an emergency. The fact that violence against women is still alive and well, whether in times of peace or conflict, is a manifestation of what's wrong and what is not working in our society. Because of course, the simple question begs itself: how can half of society be still suffering such pervasive and widespread and severe forms of violence? Together with you and other stakeholders, I will simply prioritize finding ways and means to end it, not reducing it, ending it. And I say this very consciously. And of course, the Action Coalition Against Gender-Based Violence speaks of the aspiration of being game-changing. And I personally think that to do that, we have to always attempt to be gender transformative. And to be gender transformative, we also need to rise up to the challenge of addressing violence against women in all their diversity, which also means women and girls that live outside patriarchal norms of heteronormativity. All this cannot happen without also insisting that civil society movements, women organizations, youth-led organizations are fully involved in the prevention and response efforts, including Indigenous women and rural women. And it will not happen without remaining victim and community-centered. We have to remember that our accountability is first and foremost to the victims and survivors of violence. This means ending impunity by those committing violence, not only against women and girls, but also against those that support victims and survivors to seek justice for them and those that support them. Now, in terms of how the Action Coalition on GBV and its blueprint can accelerate work towards these in the next couple of years, there's several ways I think that it can do that. Well, one is to take on violence wherever it proliferates and in the many multiple ways in which it arises. And here in particular, I'm thinking about violence against women that is mushrooming online. Now, as we all know, the intention behind online forms of violence is to control women, to suppress their freedom of expression, their freedom of thought, to punish them for their views, and to incite and commit violence against them. Now, governments, the private sector, and others cannot respond to these with quick fixes or legislative and policy initiatives that are not sufficiently human rights centered and that do not sufficiently prohibit, investigate, and prosecute online gender-based violence. Another way in which the Action Coalition can help is by continuing to focus on getting better data. There's a number of emerging important areas that intersect with violence against women and girls and on which data is lacking. One such issue is the link between climate change, environmental degradation, and violence against women and girls. And the second is the relationship between the condition of statelessness and this kind of violence. We know that stateless women and girls are particularly vulnerable to exploitation, abuse, and violence. But we do not know enough, and we still have to understand the scale of the implication of these situations. Now, another issue on which we also do not have enough data and understanding is, of course, the multiple forms of psychological forms of violence and also the scale of psychological consequences of violence that women and girls are subjected to. So there, the Action Coalition can support obtaining better data on this, but it can also support in insisting that governments lead in implementing robust legislation and policy initiatives to prevent and respond to such kinds of violence. Now, by keeping the pressure on decision makers to act and by taking an all-society approach, as the coalition is doing, and by insisting that states are not exonerated from their responsibilities, I am confident we will make the progress we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Reem, for your compelling words. And as you rightly said, we need to end gender-based violence, not just reduce it. The activism and voices of girls, adolescents, and young women are integral to driving processes of change to address gender-based violence against women and girls in all their diversity. Adolescent girls experience multiple forms of gender-based violence, which can sometimes have lifelong impacts. Now, as we have already established during this event, I am a huge fan of youth leaders. So it gives me so much joy to welcome young activist Mariam. Mariam is passionate about child's rights advocacy, and she believes that this is the way to empower girls and ensure that their voices and rights are respected by decision makers. She advocates for the rights of Syrian refugee girls in Lebanon. Now let's welcome Mariam.
الفتيات في كافة أنحاء العالم وخاصة في المجتمعات الضعيفة بحاجة للدعم للحصول على حقوقهن، فحقوق الفتيات هي نفسها حقوق الإنسان ولا بد من إحقاقها. في ظل جائحة كورونا والأزمات الاقتصادية والسياسية والأمنية حول العالم وخاصة في المجتمعات الضعيفة يزداد عدد الفتيات المحرومات من حقوقهن الأساسية، مما قد يؤدي إلى الإنهاء المبكر لتعليمهن، عزلتهن عن الأصدقاء والعائلة، ومحدودية فرص مشاركتهن في صنع القرار العام. لا زال الفتيات في جميع أنحاء العالم يواجهن الانتهاكات التي تقف في طريق تحقيق إمكانياتهم الكاملة، وخاصة الفتيات اللاجئات. كلاجئة سورية مقيمة في لبنان، أنا وغيري من الفتيات نشهد يوميا ازدياد في حالات الزواج المبكر للفتيات والتسرب المدرسي والفقر وسوء التغذية والعنف القائم على النوع الاجتماعي. فالفتيات أمثالنا يجبرن على العمل في المنزل وترك الدراسة لصالح أخوتهن الذكور. علاوة على ذلك، لا زالت القوانين على المستوى الوطني تسمح بالزواج المبكر، ولا زالت فرص التعليم والعمل والمشاركة غير متوفرة بطريقة متساوية بين الذكور والإناث. لذلك أدعو الحكومة والمجتمع المدني والقطاع الخاص إلى تقديم التزامات جديدة لإنهاء العنف القائم على النوع الاجتماعي ضد النساء والفتيات، لأن التزاماتهم مهمة للغاية لإنهاء العنف المتزايد في ظل جائحة كورونا، ومن أجل الحفاظ على تحقيق التقدم المحرز في مجال حقوق الفتيات وخاصة حقوقهن في التعليم والحماية.
Thank you so much, Mariam. We all appreciate your passion and commitment to empowering refugee girls. Time truly moves fast when you're having an amazing time. Can you believe we're almost halfway towards the end of the event? I myself cannot believe it. In the meantime, I would like to just thank all of our speakers so far and the leaders of the Action Coalition for their powerful words. A special thank you to all of you who are joining from all parts of the world. We truly appreciate your presence. In the spirit of livening things up, we're going to receive a very special performance from Pretty Loud, the first Roma girl band out of Zemun, Serbia, advocating for women's empowerment in the Romani community. Enjoy.
One woman out of 3 experience violence. A woman is not obliged to suffer violence. Braces are not our makeup.
Nijedno dete ne treba da gleda svoju majku kako je maltretiraju.
Žena treba da ima svoj stav i ciljeve koje želi da ostvari.
Women who got an education broadened their horizons and want change. I want to be that woman, educated and ready for any obstacle.
Borbom postaješ jača, nezavisna i sigurna u sebe.
As an activist, we change things and want new generation to be an example to the generation that will follow.
Parola će kota čer sođala, ali morate mangel žrtva te ovel. Peda desoro lafi, te na gazinel. Ađi kare samanta, romeljelja. Hem sarineđa je da odovao i namanglja. Nikado i bahtaljina ka ovel, ala korodak, ola kimen kapiravel.
All that I wanted, I did it all by myself. Stand proud and fighting for our rights yesterday, for tomorrow, for women standing equal next to men, for tomorrow, for women standing equal next to men.
I'm a proud gypsy, they don't want me in the club. My skin is different color, so they always want me out. Don't care about my feelings, my personality, how I rock all the dance floor with my moves so sweet. But I don't wanna fight, just to dance the pain away. Come together now, join us in the pain. Join us in the pain. Join us in the pain.
Probim da haljovema,
Zavaljani me te čuti na ona.
nikoma našunela.
Moromano čudikano glaso kada.
Probim da haljovema,
Zavaljani me te čuti na ona.
nikoma našunela.
Moromano čudikano glaso kada.
Kotrvena sa ološna puća, kotar kosu i ju me te dokaži nam. Pa kaj me te i čerama oljen da te napera. Pa su ako jum džuvli i svima isto ti snaga. Kođa ja šaj pa na pošukar, su se bite čuti nam. Ked mi želja bari pari, ole svi to stvari nam. Hari po hari prođono o udar, a me zbog tu mende je baro korako anglal.
Kotar te čade čola, sarmotove a tuto mangipe, mate garave od ova. Sari neđe pošukarke da oma.
Nije izmišljena reč, već je stvarna. To je najsnažniji osjećaj koje ljude spaja. Emocije privlače i vladaju osjećanja. Ljubav ume da oprosti ako greška nije mal. Jedan zagrljaj je potreban da osjetiš toplinu. Dobra podrška je dovoljna da na srcu olakša težinu. Pusti sve, prašti, moli, bori se i ustani sa dna kao što bih ja.
Samo tu je me, te ova dujđene, te muke na mena, mare te mangaja men. Oh, ah, but mangaja men. Oh, ah, but mangaja men.
Such an amazing performance. Thank you, Pretty Loud. Now, as you might know, the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence has set a global agenda and blueprint for evidence-based and practice-driven work on ending violence against women and girls in all their diversity. Shortly, we'll hear from leaders of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, activists, and practitioners from around the world about the groundbreaking work already taking place to prevent violence against women and girls. But first, it gives me great pleasure to give the floor to model, actress, TV host, and activist Cindy Serena Bishop, UN Women's first Goodwill Ambassador in the Asia-Pacific region, and one of Thailand's leading campaigners on ending violence against women and girls. Cindy, you're welcome.
Thank you for having me. As you know, this year, the Unite campaign's theme, Orange the World, End Violence Against Women Now, will highlight the universal nature of violence against women and girls, as well as acknowledge the challenges and additional risks related to COVID-19, humanitarian crises, and violent conflicts. As you also know, nearly 1 in 3 women globally have experienced gender-based violence. Now, this is a number I reference to quite frequently in my work as Goodwill Ambassador and in my other efforts in order to raise awareness around this global crisis. And it seems that despite our continued and our best efforts, the number has not changed, and in some cases is even on the rise. Many people also don't realize that this number would be even higher if it included the full spectrum of violence, including sexual harassment, violence in digital contexts, harmful practices which include female genital mutilation and child or forced marriages, and sexual exploitation. The good news is that violence against women and girls is entirely preventable. More evidence and practice than ever before can demonstrate that the prevention and reduction of violence is possible through comprehensive strategies that tackle root causes, transform harmful social norms, and empower women and girls through survivor-centered services across the policing, justice, health, and social sectors. I'm particularly excited to see more conversations and action toward changing powered gender relations and social norms in my country of Thailand and in Asia Pacific, which I believe is the root cause of much of the violence in this region. Through my movement, Don't Tell Me How to Dress, which pushes back against the notion that a woman is to blame for her own sexual assault, and in other local initiatives and social media campaigns, this is a wonderful opportunity to reach so many people in order to shape and mold the attitudes and behaviors of the next generation, the Generation Equality. Following on from the unveiling of the unprecedented $40 billion in commitments in the Generation Equality Forum in Paris this summer, I'm inviting all of us to affirm the 5-year action journey of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, as well as the 4 concrete actions it is taking to create lasting change by creating enabling policy, legal, and resource environments, scaling up evidence-driven prevention programming, scaling up comprehensive, accessible, and quality services for survivors, and enabling and empowering autonomous girl-led and women's rights organizations to exercise their expertise. I'm confident that if we all work together to act for equal in whatever capacity we can, we will help to ensure that the Coalition's ambitious 5-year plan will be met. We can make this year a landmark year, but only if we all act for equal.
As Cindy said, violence against women and girls is entirely preventable. There are many proven solutions and success stories around the world. We already have many examples of initiatives that have generated significant transformation that need to be amplified and scaled up to accelerate global efforts to end violence against women. One such initiative that has demonstrated impressive results for women and girls despite the constraints of the pandemic is the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative. It is an enormous pleasure to introduce Jutta Urpilainen. European Union Commissioner for International Partnership. Yuta, please share with us promising practices and success stories of the Spotlight Initiative, which have proven that comprehensive, multi-stakeholder approaches lead to transformative results in ending violence against women and girls in all their diversity, and why it is critical that multiple stakeholders invest now in evidence-based approaches to end gender-based violence against women and girls.
Dear friends, women and girls face gender-based discrimination and violence every day and everywhere. The International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women reminds us of this sad fact. It is a top priority for the European Union to ensure that women and girls are free from all forms of gender-based violence. Exactly a year ago, the EU adopted an ambitious new action plan to promote gender equality and women's empowerment in external relations. We also continue to invest in the Spotlight Initiative, a joint EU-UN partnership. The Spotlight Initiative addresses both the roots and symptoms of violence against women and girls in 26 countries and 6 regions around the world. The results speak for themselves. Thanks to the Spotlight Initiative, 84 laws and policies have been signed or strengthened. 10 countries have increased their budgets for gender-based violence prevention by an average of over 30%. Civil society organizations play a crucial role. I am proud to say that through the Spotlight Initiative, almost 150 million euros has been allocated to civil society. The Spotlight Initiative has generated a wealth of best practices. Now we need to build on them. I call on all those present to join in the efforts to end violence against women and girls. Together, we can do it.
We will now hear from Ms. Gida Annani, the founder and director of ABAD, a resource center for gender equality, which is also a leader of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. ABAD is a civil society organization based in Lebanon that aims to achieve gender equality as an essential condition to sustainable social and economic development in the MENA region. Their dynamic team is comprised of dedicated activists, lawyers, consultants, social workers, and researchers who creatively test new approaches as part of the larger effort to achieve an equitable society free of hegemonic masculinities and violence against women. Gida, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today. Now, Gida, ABAD is well recognized for its work on transforming masculinities. Could you please tell us more from your experience in Lebanon and in the MENA region, why engaging men and boys is a crucial strategy in our global efforts to end violence? Gida, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chantal. ABAD is quite proud to be one of the co-leads of the Generation Equality Action Coalition on GBV. We're committed to bringing the voices of women and girls to the table, as well as the perspective of the MENA region. We believe that they are best placed to make decisions about their own lives and future, and they should be heard. ABAD is one of the very few organizations working on the ground, focusing on engaging men and boys in the region. This is because we firmly believe and apply a holistic approach that take into account the root causes of gender inequalities. We work not only to respond to GBV, but also to prevent it. And this is through shifting like toxic social norms that are contributing to the culture of gender-based violence and the tolerance to gender-based violence. According to a very recent report by UNDP about data related to internal security forces in Lebanon, it was only evident that it was mainly the husband committing GBV, like 60% of the cases, the father 13%, and the brother 9%. And this shows only how important it is to engage with men and boys. You know, on a systemic level, there's a greater need to connect our work on masculinities to male violence and perpetration of violence against women and girls, as well as militarism, sectarianism, and other systems of oppressions that affect the well-being of women and girls. The recent upheaval in violence conflict taking place on Lebanese streets are a direct result of patriarchal masculine ideals of strength, dominance, being the defender of one's social group, and capacity for violence. These realities make it more important to highlight the need to work with men and boys in order to challenge these ideals and promote more equitable and peaceful masculinities throughout our work, being on individual, community level, national level, or even international level. The best way to achieve peace everywhere is by simply reducing violence everywhere. And the best way to reduce gender-based violence and eliminating gender inequalities is by involving everyone, and literally everyone, and engaging actively and effectively both sides of the equation of equality, women and men, and ensuring leaving no one behind. Ending violence against women and girls is the right thing to do, a smart investment to make, and it is possible. We can and must create a world where every woman and girl can thrive in a world free from violence, discrimination, hatred, and fear. Violence is holding us back, and it's time to come together around a commitment to halving global violence by 2030 and to build a better future for our women and children and girls around the globe. Thank you.
Thank you, Gita. And as you rightly said, it is everyone's responsibility to end violence against women. It's so inspiring to hear the work that you're doing, and I hope other organizations around the world can be inspired to adopt a holistic approach centered around systems change and acknowledge the pivotal role that can and is already being played by men to transform this narrative, and the role being played by men as drivers of change. Thank you so much, Gita.
We are happy to celebrate with the government of the UK the launch of the second phase of What Works to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls program. Prevention is one of the 4 areas of action of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. We want to acknowledge the leadership of the United Kingdom in ending violence against women globally and a significant commitment of resources to scale up evidence-driven prevention programming through the What Works program that was announced at the Generation Equality Forum in Paris. Minister Ford, please tell us about the What Works program, its key achievements thus far, and what we can expect during this new phase of the initiative.
Gender-based violence threatens the lives and well-being of women and girls, and it prevents them from accessing opportunities that are fundamental to freedom and development. This is one of the most systemic and widespread human rights violations of our time, and the UK is determined to change this. I've been deeply concerned by the surge in violence and abuse during the pandemic, both here in the UK and across the world. And as well as women and girls, marginalised groups are particularly at risk, including those who are LGBT+, living with a disability, and from minority ethnic or religious groups. We've just completed the historic climate change conference at COP, and it's important to remember that climate change can be a serious aggravator of violence. 1 in 5 women refugees that are displaced due to natural disaster will experience sexual violence. So I share your outrage at this violence that millions suffer from every day. But now we have evidence, including from the UK's What Works to Prevent Violence programme, and this shows that violence is not inevitable. We've run projects in countries as diverse as Zambia, Pakistan, the DRC, and our rigorous evaluations of these projects have shown that they've achieved significant reductions in violence, around 50% in a few years. And together we have the opportunity and the obligation to use this evidence to spur on global action. That's why we're investing £67.5 million in a successor programme to scale up proven approaches and pioneer new solutions to prevent violence and conflict, and for the most marginalised women and girls. And I'm proud that this is the largest investment by any donor government in programming and research to prevent violence against women and girls. We're really excited by this opportunity, but we know it will be hard. It will require working with other leaders and learning from what hasn't worked as well as what has, and using this experience to refine and redouble our efforts. So violence against women and girls is wholly unacceptable, but it can be prevented. We need to challenge the inertia caused by the perception that violence is always inevitable, or that change takes generations. Because violence is not inevitable, change can be made to happen. It's time to act for equal.
Thank you, Minister Ford, for the critical insights into what is needed to prevent gender-based violence. In keeping with the discussion on the change that is needed and possible, let us again hear from our leaders and commitment makers on the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence.
Hearing Foundation has been combating violence against women since 2008 and has committed $8.4 million to supporting survivors over the next 5 years. We will scale up holistic care for women survivors by financing, alongside the French government, the opening of 15 centers in France based on the innovative model of La Maison des Femmes in Saint-Denis. With the 1 in 3 Women Network, we will bring on board 50 private sector organizations to implement internal policies to combat violence against women in line with the new ILO Convention.
We anticipate that city governments around the world will commit resources as well as build innovative programs that will transform the way that cities are planned, designed, and managed to make them more gender inclusive and safe for women and others. This, we believe, will happen when diverse grassroots voices inform urban policies and programs, as well as when city and national governments use data and evidence to build programs for gender inclusive cities.
As the largest platform of women's rights organizations in Europe and co-leaders in the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, we are currently advocating for a strong proposal by the European Commission to tackle all forms of gender-based violence against women and girls in the EU. We also aim to promote the recognition of indispensable work of women's rights organizations, especially in the current health crisis. This means more funding and support for your work. At the European Women's Lobby, we have fought to end violence against women and girls for 30 years, and we won't rest until we achieve it.
Financial commitments and political will are key to ending gender-based violence. Substantive financial commitments must be made to ensure that laws and policies are effectively implemented and that state agencies, civil society organizations, youth groups, and other stakeholders are well-resourced to provide comprehensive and quality support services to survivors, as well as to work towards ending gender-based violence.
Para concretar los compromisos de los gobiernos para terminar con la violencia basada en género, es necesario alcanzar el convencimiento de todas las instituciones de un Estado de implementar y formular planes y proyectos vinculados a esta temática en el marco de una trama interinstitucional. Debe ser toda la institucionalidad de un Estado la que, con decisión, se proponga terminar con la violencia basada en género, y no solo en un país. Un país solo no lo va a poder lograr. Es necesaria la colaboración. Para eso nos hemos sumado a la Coalición para la Acción.
Scaling up comprehensive, accessible, and quality services for survivors is one of the 4 actions of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence.
Here with us is Teresa Twokam, Director of the Kiribati Women and Children Support Center in the Pacific region. Teresa, could you please tell us the impact of your work and the importance of survivor-centered services in transforming women and girls' lives in the aftermath of violence and abuse?
A warm melody to you from the Republic of Kiribati in the Pacific. Today, we come together as one family to commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women. In 2008, a national prevalence survey conducted showed that 68% of women between the ages of 15 to 49 years of age have experienced physical and or sexual abuse by their intimate partner in our country. This rate of violence is among the highest in the Pacific region and the world. 10 years later, after the release of those survey findings, our center, KWCSC, was established in 2018 as the result of a collective effort. The goal of KWCSC is to ensure that the women and girls live a life free of violence and uphold their human rights. KWCSC is the first ever feminist organization in Kiribati to provide support to women and children who are survivors of violence by providing psychosocial support services. Our center provides free and confidential gender-based violence counseling, free legal support, a 24-hour free helpline, emergency shelter, as well as providing technical support to our government and CSOs alike on GBV, including training and technical advice. Our service delivery is rights-based, survivor-centered, and aligns with the do no harm principle. We work with women and girls survivors of all ages, from supporting them in their immediate needs to working with them long-term, which includes ensuring they hold perpetrators accountable and are empowered and supported to lodge their complaint and applications for protection orders to the police and court. Just as we support women and girls to hold perpetrators to account, KWCSC does the same with organizations who are providing services to survivors of violence when they fail to act. As we only used to have one physical center in Kiribati for women and girls to access our services, located in South Tarawa, many women and girls couldn't access services in a timely manner. But this year, we opened our second center on Christmas Island, which is also the second most populated island. So now women and girls in Christmas no longer need to travel to South Tarawa. We cannot compare gender-based violence or domestic violence with other types of violence or crimes because of its systematic and persistent nature, which is entrenched in all forms of life, from our homes, communities, schools, places of worship and play, to our highest level of decision-making. We need targeted, well-coordinated, whole-of-country and long-term measures and resources to prevent violence against women and girls in Kiribati. This is a perfect time to evaluate our commitment and to focus strategically on transformative actions that are meaningful and realistic to different jurisdictions. We thank our partners, especially UN Women and DFAD, who we work closely with to ensure our women and girls access the best services they possibly can. UN Women's support to us is through the Pacific Partnership to End Violence Against Women program, funded primarily by the European Union and the governments of Australia and New Zealand and UN Women. Let us end violence against women now. It's time to act for equal.
Thank you, Teresa, for reminding us of the importance of survivor-centered services for women and girls as part of our efforts to prevent and eliminate violence against women and girls. Now, let's hear from the UN heads of agencies about their commitments to the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence.
In commemoration of the 30-year anniversary of the 16 Days of Activism, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and building on the momentum of commitments made at the Generation Equality Forum in Paris,
we, the heads of agencies of the United Nations and IDLO, reaffirm the collective commitments made and invite new commitment makers to
scale up evidence-driven interventions to prevent gender-based violence in at least 25 high-prevalence countries, guided by the Respect Women framework.
Growing evidence and practice demonstrate that such violence is indeed preventable.
increase direct investment in effective evidence-based and practice-informed programs and policies to prevent gender-based violence against women, adolescent girls, and young women in their diversity. And strong and autonomous women's rights movements are critical to achieving results.
Accelerate action to end harmful practices, including female genital mutilation and early and forced marriage, including in crisis and humanitarian settings, through evidence-driven prevention programming, support for survivors, access to justice, and support to grassroots-led movements.
Prevent and eliminate violence and harassment in the world of work by ratifying the ILO Convention number 190 and adopting and implementing an inclusive, integrated, and gender-responsive approach for a world of work based on dignity and respect for all.
We will increase access to essential services for survivors of gender-based violence in at least 25 countries.
Scale up support for gender-responsive policing in at least 30 countries to address violence against women and girls, including gender-related killing.
Increase access to gender-responsive justice for women and girls and ensure perpetrators' accountability.
In particular, WHO has committed to facilitating a 25% increase in the proportion of countries that have clinical guidelines and protocols to respond to violence against women in line with WHO recommendations.
As we commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls under the UNITE campaign,
we highlight the universal nature of violence against women and girls and acknowledge the unique challenges related to the COVID-19 pandemic as well as humanitarian and conflict situations.
We invite you to join us to act for equal to orange the world. End violence against women now.
Moving on, the private sector has a huge role to play in eliminating violence against women, both in addressing violence and harassment in the workplace and also in contributing to the development and financing of solutions. Here with us now is Leanne Wood, Chief Human Resources Officer from Vodafone. Now, Leanne, could you please tell us about the impact of Vodafone's work and what more companies in the private sector can do to prevent and respond to violence against women and girls?
Thanks, Chantal. In 2019, we commissioned global research that revealed 80 million working women across 107 countries. That's approximately 15% of women in the workforce had experienced domestic violence over the last 12 months. More than 1/3 of survivors surveyed said that they suffered from reduced productivity. In 2019, we launched our domestic violence and abuse policy at Vodafone, specifically designed to support survivors. This policy includes training for managers and HR teams on supporting survivors at work, 10 days paid safe leave, support including specialist counselling and assistance in the event of financial abuse, and safety measures in the workplace, including for remote and hybrid working. Research conducted last year on the impact of our policy showed it is making a difference to our employees. Survivors are using the policy, with the most frequent supports being referrals to counsellors, specialist support, and paid safe leave. Training has had a really powerful impact on many managers. Some have gone on to support survivors in their teams, and others have played a wider advocacy role in their community. Our workplace policy was informed by our research and inspired by over a decade of work that Vodafone Foundation has done to support survivors. This includes the Bright Sky app, which connects survivors to support. Bright Sky is now live in 10 countries across Europe and Africa with over 100,000 users. We saw a 75% increase in downloads during the pandemic. On average, Bright Sky is helping 70 people per day to identify and connect to support services. Bright Sky, alongside workplace policies and support, are critical to ending the cycle of abuse. We need to place survivor support at the heart of our plans as we emerge from the pandemic. And as more employers introduce policies and support, together we can end this cycle of abuse. We know we can't achieve this alone, so we're part of the He for She Alliance, and our CEO, Nick Reed, is a He for She champion. We recognise that engaging men and boys is critical to ending the cycle of abuse. This is a key step in helping achieve gender equality, which is a basic human right that benefits everyone.
Thank you, Leanne and Vodafone, for representing the private sector. 2021 marks the 30th anniversary of the Global 16 Days campaign launched by the Center for Women's Global Leadership in 1991. Since it was first initiated, over 6,000 organizations in approximately 187 countries have participated in the campaign, with the reach of 300 million people around the world. It continues to be coordinated every year by the Center for Women's Global Leadership. And today, we are joined by the amazing Charlotte Bunch, who is the founding director and senior scholar for the center. It is such an incredible honor to have her with us today. Now, Charlotte, could you please tell us why the campaign and women's activism continue to be fundamental to our global efforts to end violence against women? And please tell us about the special thematic focus of the Global 16 Days campaign this year.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here on the 30th anniversary of the 16 Days campaign. And the campaign was really launched by the center and around 50 other non-governmental civil society organizations with the purpose of making the link between violence against women and human rights. And I think it's still very vital to remind people that violence against women is a violation of human rights. For people who weren't here 30 years ago, they may not realize that until the Vienna World Conference in 1993, violence was not recognized as a human rights abuse. So it's still very vital today to keep putting this issue in the framework of human rights, because that is where government accountability for actions around violence against women is framed. It's in that frame of human rights that we can call for an end to impunity for violence against women. And I think all the evidence shows that it is really the existence of an autonomous women's rights movement that has brought these changes over the last 30 years. As civil society, we're particularly proud that violence against women is an issue that the grassroots of women put on the global agenda. Today, we're very proud that the UN has an international day, has adopted the Civil Society International Day against violence against women, and that many governments now feel they are called upon to report, because it is an issue that came from women's lives. It came from small groups of women in every part of the world. This year, for the 30th anniversary, we want to focus primarily on femicide to make the point that violence against women isn't just a bad thing. It's something that kills. It's something that kills women and girls. It kills on a daily basis. So this year we want to focus on femicide with the recognition that this is the most extreme violation of women's human rights, the violation of the right to life, the right to physical security, and to simply be alive. And so the focus on femicide is also a focus on ending impunity, because for so many of the women around the world, violence against women is everywhere. It's in every country. And until we end the impunity, both the impunity of governments in terms of criminal justice and prosecution, but also the impunity in the family and in the home, the ways in which we often still cover up for the brothers, the uncles, the fathers, the husbands who are committing this violence. We have to all take a role in ending impunity. The other theme that I would just mention is that we are continuing something we began in 2018, which is ending gender-based violence in the world of work, and particularly with the ratification of the ILO, the International Labor Organization Convention on ending harassment and violence in the workplace. So we want to bring together femicide and ending violence in the workplace as two of the key parts of our broad theme, which is always ending violence, ending the impunity for violence, and creating a violence-free life for women and girls, but also what that means for men and boys, because violence anywhere leads to violence everywhere. And I think much of the racial violence and the violence we have between countries is very linked to the acceptance of violence in the home, and for children to see violence as a solution grows into other spheres. So with that, I would just like to say, I'm welcoming this year's 30th anniversary as a chance to rekindle the enthusiasm and the amazing amount of partnerships that UN Women now has through the action coalitions, but through the ongoing work in the 16 Days campaign to help us all realize that it's time, I would say it's past time, to act for equal.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for this. I really liked how you mentioned that violence anywhere leads to violence everywhere. And it is indeed true. And seeing the strides that we have made through this 16 Days campaign, more action can continue to be taken, more awareness raising and more accountability can continue to happen in this area. Once again, thank you so much for your amazing work that you have done through the Center for Women's Global Leadership.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
As it has been demonstrated today, activism can take multiple forms, including through music and many other artistic forms. We now have the pleasure of introducing a Brazilian artist whose message aims to empower women, especially Afro-descendant Brazilian women who have long endured the injustice of racism and sexism. I am so excited to hear from MC Sophia.
Família, o Dia Internacional da Violência contra a Mulher é um dia super importante para pensar ações e reflexões que possam ajudar mulheres do mundo inteiro que estão passando por essas violências, que infelizmente está estruturado na cultura da nossa sociedade patriarcal. Então, seguimos em lutas, todas nós mulheres, fortes, resistentes e frágeis também. E para fechar com chave de ouro, vamos com a minha música Empoderada. Minha rima tem poder, poder na palavra. Eu te empodero, eu sou empoderada. E com minha autoestima eu sou graduada. Não querem ver preta rica, eu vou ser milionária. Meu cabelo crespo, eu vou ser respeitada. Minha pele retinta, pique preta rara. O opressor vê pente e garfo e quer dar risada. Tá achando que eu sou palhaça e cai na gargalhada? Iau! E é hora de agir pela igualdade. Bora!
Thank you, MC Sophia. We look forward to hearing more of your music and your continuing efforts for the women and girls of Brazil. I'd like to thank everyone who has participated in today's commemoration event to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women and Girls. In particular, I'd like to thank the Secretary General for his leadership and commitment to making the prevention of violence against women and girls a top priority for the United Nations. Today is an important time to raise our voices and remind each other that violence against women and girls continues to be the most pervasive and pressing human rights issue around the world. But today, we should also feel a sense of hope. I personally feel very encouraged and inspired by all of the examples we have heard of the success stories of the promising practices and transformative work that are already leading to reductions in violence, changing social norms, and empowering women and girls throughout the world. The Generation Equality Forum has built a powerful global movement and created unprecedented momentum and commitments to prevent and eliminate violence against women and girls. And as the youth, we are on a roll. Take, for example, Youth Task Force members Doreen, Chamakia, Juan Pablo, and so many others providing assistance to underage victims of gender-based violence, transforming masculinities, and dismantling gender stereotypes. What we now need is to accelerate action. We need political will, and above all, we urgently need to see an increase in the financing of the proven solutions. Eradicating violence against women and girls requires all of us to come together. Every single one of us can make a difference. We all can take a stand. I, for one, personally promise you all that I will not rest and I will not be silent until the whole world takes notice and begins to act now. And by now, I mean right this hour, right this minute, and right this second. If you feel motivated by what you've heard today, you can contribute to making the world free from violence by joining the Give 25 for UNTF 25 challenge and donating $25 to the UN Trust Fund, and join the conversation online, on social media. Use the hashtags OrangeTheWorld and 16 Days and speak up to end violence against women and girls. Together, we all can act now and end gender-based violence. Thank you.